Hello and welcome to the Gonzales Mitchell Show. I'm Clay Mitchell.
And I'm Patrick Gonzales.
Well, yesterday, Patrick, January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump was inaugurated as our 47th president. Lots of things happened in the news, my friend.
Yes, they did. And it was Martin Luther King Day, so it was a double celebration.
It was that truly an American kind of day, January 20th.
Absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
you have recently issued a couple of polls, I think it one poll in two parts. The first poll had to do with Governor Moore's approval rating. It had to do with a potential gubernatorial matchup in 2026 between former Governor Hogan and Governor Moore, and how we're going to deal with the budget deficit. Do we raise various taxes or not? And some of this was illuminating. Now, you say in your poll, Governor Moore enjoyed a 61% approval rating of Governor Moore, which is a very good approval rating. I think Governor Hogan at his height had 72, but first 2 years of a new administration, 61. That's pretty good. But in that, there's some numbers and some nuances to that approval. If you could get into that, you talk about soft numbers and hard numbers, and what did you see in your polling?
Well, Brother Clay, if nothing else, my journey on this earth needs to be illuminating. So I like shining light when possible. So when I look at Governor Moore's 61% approval, you can't compare it to what Governor Hogan had, because it was a totally different dynamic. And as a Republican, Larry Hogan was able to get a sufficient number of Democrats to approve that would send it up into those kind of numbers. 61 for a Democrat is the highest approval in the state for a Democrat in 40 years since William Donald Schaefer was governor. Within that 61%, we asked voters, do you approve or disapprove of the job Wes Moore is doing as governor? And if they say, oh, I approve, well, then our interviewers say, well, is that strongly approve or somewhat approve? And with Governor Moore's 61%, it's 29% strongly approve and 32% somewhat approve. Okay, again, 61% is not bad, but it would be much better if that 61 was comprised of 40% strongly approve and 21% somewhat. So I don't want to nitpick, but it makes a difference. Intensity of support. I mean, like when you and I first met, you kind of liked me. And then you kind of got to know me and you really liked me. And then you really got to know me and we're back to kind of liking me. So you got to be careful. And, but anyway, overall, if I'm governor of Maryland, perish the thought, I'll take 61% approval.
I think no matter how you look at it, 61%, even including somewhat approve, is a pretty good number. And I don't know, it may have something to do with the impending budget situation. I think people are anxious about that, and what could be done to solve that problem. It's $3 billion coming up this year. I think by 2030, it's supposed to somewhat double or thereabouts to $6 billion. A lot of it has to do with the mandatory spending that's going on, and how to solve that problem is is an issue. I think that may have something to do with the anxiety caused by that. Now, 2026, we President Trump just was inaugurated. Immediately, 2026 races come to the fore. Looking
Right.
at a potential race between Governor Moore and assuming the Republicans nominate and elect former Governor Hogan in the primary. You had some interesting numbers. To me, it looked it mirrored the last election, but it was somewhat lower for Hogan than what I thought it was going to be. Get into those numbers if you would.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the first assumption we have to make is that Governor Hogan would want to run and decides to run. But anyway, as a exercise in kind of trying to foresee what might happen here in the state, we asked voters thinking ahead, if the
Mhm.
2026 election for governor were held today, for whom would you vote? Wes Moore, the Democrat, or Larry Hogan, the Republican? And what we found was 52% said Wes Moore, the Democrat, and 38% said Larry Hogan, the Republican, with 10% undecided. Now, you're right. My very first thought when I saw those results, very similar to the election results in November when Governor Hogan ran for the open Senate seat against now Senator Angela Also Brooks. And the key in Maryland, Clay, as you well know, you and I have been involved in Maryland politics for many, many, many years. I think Abe Lincoln was president when you and I first got involved, wasn't he? I can't
It,
remember.
it
But
was. I
anyway,
think he was getting ready to go into a second term, and then things
yeah.
happened.
And so a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. But anyway, okay. In Maryland, if a Republican is to win a statewide office, several have done it in the last 45 years at the executive level, Governor Ehrlich, Governor Hogan, but at the Senate, at the federal level, no Republican since Mac Mathias in 1980 has won a statewide election. To do that today, a Republican needs 30% of Democrats to vote for them on election day. It's simple math. It doesn't get to 50% unless that happens. So, in this poll that we just completed, we had Governor Hogan, who got a third of the Democrats when he ran for governor and when he ran for reelection, certainly when he ran for reelection, to vote for him. In this recent poll, 18% of Democrats said they would vote for Larry Hogan, the Republican. That's not going to do it. And Governor Moore, as we talked about, had 61% approval. He's got that overall good support, and within his own party base, he's got very strong support. So at this point, Clay Mitchell, it would be difficult to conceive of a scenario where if tomorrow the election were held, the
Right.
former Governor Hogan could get the necessary votes. My take on that is if Governor Hogan decides to run for governor, ultimately, a lot of his fate is going to be outside of his control. In other words, Democrats, voters overall, and Democrats specifically, are going to have to become much more disenchanted with incumbent Wes Moore than they are today. And with the upcoming session trying to deal with this budget deficit, that is a possibility.
I see in the news. I was thinking of the Baltimore Banner today. Obviously, if the budget goes to heck in a handbasket, Governor Moore's going to have a problem. But I see him making some adjustments, which I applaud, to where he's trying to modify the blueprint for Maryland to make it more financially viable given the current budget situation. I think if he succeeds with that and persuades some of his party to go along with some adjustments, he'll do well. If, on the other hand, and it's just my view, if that doesn't happen and we're looking at raising taxes, having to raise taxes to pay for this mandatory spending, that 18% number of Democrats would increase to maybe 30% to vote for Hogan the next time. But I think that's all up in the air right now. given this session, and who knows how that's going to pan out. But I do give Governor Moore kudos for recognizing the problem and trying somehow to finesse his way to adjust that. Like, given
Yes.
the budget deficit, obviously the questions come up about taxes. You polled about property taxes, sales taxes, and income taxes. What were your findings on that? Let's start off with the property tax.
Okay. Well, first, Clay, let me just say we framed it in terms of the reality. And the reality is raising these taxes to solve the deficit, to cover the deficit problem. Okay. I've asked, I've done polls plenty of times where voters indicate a strong willingness to pay taxes if they perceive it's for something necessary or something in their self or in their interest. For instance, would you consider a slight increase or an increase in the sales tax to build new roads and bridges in Maryland? Oh, I've had a majority say they would support that.
Mhm.
Would you support a tax increase to hire more police and increase public safety? Oh, yeah. We framed this one as there is a deficit. It is going to get worse if we don't deal with it. Okay. Would you support or oppose an increase in the property tax to solve this deficit? And what we found was that 77% of Marylanders said no. And here's my take, Clay. Voters are intelligent. They understand. They might not like it. I certainly
Mhm.
don't. But you got to pay taxes if you're going to live in a society that's well functioning and doing well as we are. But when you ask them about the deficit, in their minds, they're thinking the deficit, that problem my elected official created. I didn't. And so, no, I am not willing to pay taxes for a problem that the politicians created. And so that's where we're at right now.
It was bipartisan. I saw 90% of Republicans opposed it, 70% of Democrats, 79% of independents. It wasn't even close to being 50-50 in any type of political affiliation. Same with the sales
Right.
tax and the income tax. It was pretty much around 70%, 75% of all of those opposed that. I did read in
No, exactly.
That same Baltimore Banner piece, excuse me, the governor was also making mention about we need to look at this formula spending thing, which I think is a good message to hear from him, because I think that's the only way we're going to be able to dig our way out of what's coming our way. Switching now, my friend, to the national scene.
Yes.
You have job approval numbers for both then President elect Trump and then President Joe Biden. Obviously, I think it shows a divide along party lines. What say you, sir?
Well, as soon as you said we got to switch to the national, I thought to myself, America the beautiful. Um, and that was an amazing a cappella job that Carrie Underwood did yesterday. That was a
Yes, she
horrible
did.
one that I just did, but wasn't that amazing? And it was funny, Clay, to sit there and watch. And there was that pause, and it almost seemed, it seemed like days at some point. It probably was a minute at most, but a minute of dead air on national, that's a long time. And Carrie Underwood handled that technical boo boo so well, and I just loved it. But when we asked,
might join the acapella version
oh, I
personally.
did too. She said anybody who knows the words join in,
Yeah.
and
No, those words, come on.
I joined in. I kind of fouled up some of the words, but that's just because whatever. Anyway, so in Maryland, during this recent poll, we also asked voters whether they approve or disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing coming in the door and Joe Biden is doing heading out the door. And what we found was that 55% of Marylanders approve of the job Joe Biden was doing as president, and 43% disapproved. And 35% approved of the job Donald was doing getting ready to assume office, and 58% disapproved, 51% strongly disapproved. And that, Clayton, speaks to the sharp divide of the great old line state of Maryland. Maryland is one of the most democratic states in the Union, very, very blue. It was probably one of Harris's in the recent election top 3 or 4 states. And so you're going to get that. What you get is for President Biden a sharp 80% approval among Democrats, which puts him over the 50% threshold. And then for a Republican, Donald Trump, coming in, you get that 80% plus disapproval, which drives his approval rating way down. So nothing unexpected with that.
I think that's a lesson for any Republican that wants to win statewide office needs to heed that. Last time when Dan Cox ran, obviously he had the mega vote, no question about it. But he didn't bring in that 30% of Democrats that Larry Hogan was able to do, which I think, looking at this poll, sends a message to the Republican Party. You want to run for U.S. Senate? You want to run for governor? You can't be that far to the right. You can't be a Trump Republican to win in Maryland. That's the message I get from that.
Well, and it makes it tough, but again, and you know, there are times on this earth, Clay, when our fate really is out of our control. And
Right.
in some ways, when a Republican is running statewide, a lot of their fate is out of their control, no matter what. And that fate is that dynamic that you need is for the Democratic candidate to have enough of an issue with his constituents, with his caucus, his base, that are registered Democrats in the state, where all of a sudden it becomes possible for about a third of them to say, nope, I'm going to the Republican. The Republican himself isn't going to automatically cause that to happen. He needs, now the Republican, as you point out, has to be someone acceptable to a Democratic voter, but it also requires to have a Democratic, candidate on the ballot that just people are kind of totally comfortable with. And that, quite frankly, is is really the problem that Governor Hogan faced in November. Angela Alsobrooks was extremely popular within her own base. That's just a fact. And you can argue this or say that. That's the reality. So, anywho, what I'm most fascinated by in this poll was that question we asked Maryland voters, very blue state. Think we got some sanctuary cities here in the state. I'm not sure Baltimore is one or not. I heard our county executive talking about, being so welcoming to immigrants and all that. And that's fine. But in Maryland, we asked voters, do you support or oppose Maryland officials being required to cooperate with federal law enforcement in their efforts to arrest and deport people in this country illegally who have committed crimes? And what we found is 76% of Marylanders across the board support that. About 90% of Republicans, about 80% of independents, and 2 out of 3 Democrats say, yes, we support Maryland officials being required to cooperate with federal agents in their efforts to arrest and deport people that have committed crimes that should not be here.
That the amount of margin in that, quite frankly, shocked me. That it was so
Oh, I
overwhelming
know.
supporting that. Whereas if
Well,
this
it's
was,
common sense, Clay. It's
but if
common
this was,
sense. You've
but,
committed a crime. You've
but
if I come
if
in
this,
your house, not invited, and I beat the living crap out of you, which I couldn't do, you'd kill me. But wouldn't you agree that when the feds came to get me, they ought to ship me back to Havana, where I came from? Wouldn't you
that's
support that?
I would support that, Patrick, but I would do everything I can to help
Okay.
you out. I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
I
A
appreciate it.
big shift in your poll direction of the country in September. 50% of Marylanders thought that the country was going in the right direction, but there was a big shift in that, wasn't there, my friend?
Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay. And these are the rough numbers. Okay. So in September, overall, do you think things are moving in the country, moving in the right direction or wrong direction? Standard question you always ask because it's a good barometer of what's going on vis how people are going to vote. So in
Right.
Maryland, in September, 50% right direction, 40% wrong direction, something like that. And then we just asked it a couple of weeks ago, do you think things are moving in the right direction, wrong? All of a sudden, it's 35% right direction, 59% wrong direction. But here is the mind boggling thing. Have things changed that much in this country from September to today? No. But in September, 80% of Democrats said things are moving in the right direction because their party's president is in office and we're good. Whereas in September, 80% of Republicans said, no, things are moving in the wrong direction. And that dynamic created a 50% right direction. Well, 2 weeks ago, when we asked again, 80% of Democrats who had in September said right direction said wrong direction. And 80% of Republicans who had said wrong direction now said right direction. Why? Because there was an election. And my team won. I'm happy. My team lost. I'm sad. And it's not really much more complicated than that. So,
I saw that and I thought, oh gosh, everybody's got to be on one team or the other. We don't just can't get along, Patrick. Now the
can't what?
Fed,
You know what?
yeah,
Can't we all get along? But the number that was most, indicative of true reality, because the world didn't change that much from September. The independence went like 40% right direction, 50% wrong direction in September to like 35, 34. Independence dropped about 5 or 6 points right direction. The wrong direction number stayed steady. So they weren't driven by the emotional attachment as party registrants were. And
that's,
but Clay, just think in terms on a personal level. I'll tell you one thing. You and I were a lot more excited Sunday morning about that game and our kind of overall approach to professional football Sunday
yeah,
morning than we were Monday morning. Is that not true?
that is true. Well, my dreams were crushed.
I know. I went to bed. I just shut my eyes the last. I couldn't. I was crying, weeping. You know.
Oh, that 2 point conversion at the end. Oh my, come on, guys.
No, I
What can
know.
you do,
I know.
Patrick?
I'm not going to second guess anybody.
Well, gosh, I look at that clock on the wall, dude. I think it's about we're going to get together here again soon and talk about some other stuff. But for now, I think it's time to say goodbye, Patrick.
Goodbye, Patrick.
Goodbye, Patrick. Talk to you soon.